I'm Rich Rockwell. I've been a trustee with the Historical Society of Bloomfield for about 20 years. I'm also their webmaster, and I curate and digitize photos mostly from negatives. So the Oaks family was a very prominent family in Bloomfield for about 100 years, and I've always been interested in them. I've also been interested in the history of industry in Bloomfield. So I've been collecting photos and doing research on the family and industry, and I'm sharing that information in this presentation. This is a recorded version of a program that I did live on October 28th. I added some information, enhanced it, and added some photographs. And this is going to be our first video in our new YouTube channel. So I'm going to go ahead and start our program now. I'm going to talk about Oaks Pond, Oaks Mill, and the Oaks family. A lot of the information I got, especially about the history of the company, comes from a book called Turn of the Century: The Record of the House of Thomas Oaks and Company as their centennial anniversary is celebrated. So in 1930, it was their 100th anniversary, and they commissioned this book. It's got a lot of information about genealogy of the family, the various equipment they used in the mill over time. And it's a very thorough documentation of what the mill was like between 1830 and 1930. We have a digital copy of this book available on our website if you'd like to get into more detail about the family and the equipment and additional photographs and especially family members. So this is David Oaks. He's the man who started the mill in 1830. So 1830, he started the mill, but how did he end up in Bloomfield? So we're going to go back to when David's father was born, or David's father came to America in 1802. Thomas Oaks was an engineer and a millwright in Elliston, Staffordshire, England. He came to Philadelphia and he partnered with Dury Bromley, repairing mills along the East Coast. Bromley ended up marrying Maria Cadmus. She was from Bloomfield. The Cadmus family was a prominent family in Bloomfield at the time. And Mr. Oaks and Mr. Bromley were commissioned to build a grist mill for Mr. Kingsland. So the house you're seeing is it's called Kingsland Manor. It's still existing. It's a historic site in Nutley. So this used to be part of Bloomfield, but it's now Nutley. So Mr. Kingsland engaged the company, Oaks and Bromley, to build a grist mill for him. And Thomas ended up meeting Mr. Kingsland's daughter, Rachel, and ended up marrying her in 1808. And then in 1809, David was born at Kingsland. So this is the house he was born in and lived in and grew up in. In 1823, Thomas died. David was just a teenager at the time. Then in 1826, David went to Orange to learn wool manufacturing from Joshua Smith. And then in 1830, he was just 21 years old, he built his own mill in Bloomfield on Third River. This is what the original mill looked like. It was just a single room building. As the mill prospered, they expanded. This is what the mill looked like around 1855. And there was a period of time when you'll see maps that refer to the mills as Cashmere Manufacturing. So that was a name that was used sometime to refer to the mill. So Oaks developed a very good reputation back as far as when they started the first mill, 1830s. Housewives came from far and near to buy yarn for weaving. So there was an article published about the history of the mill, and they were talking about how in 1830s, this is where people would come, the women would come to buy yarn. And would be a very difficult, arduous route for them to come here. Some of them came from as far as West Essex, which was, they called it Horseneck County. That's sort of where West Caldwell is. So people made this arduous journey to buy wool on horseback or stagecoach, horse and carriage. In 1861, we're making wool called Oaks Blue, which was dyed indigo blue, for Civil War uniforms. And Mr. Oaks extended credit to the U.S. government so they could continue making uniforms for the war. And when the war was over, Mr. Oaks was repaid 100%. In 1876, there was a centennial exposition in Philadelphia, and Oaks's won the Best in Show for superb woolens and worsteds. In 1896, President McKinley chose Oaks cloth for his inauguration suit. And then into the early 1900s and up to 1943, Oaks wool was used for uniforms for Navy, Coast Guard, and Army, and also for police and fire department uniforms. This is what the mill looked like around 1927. This was just around its peak. At its peak, it covered 30.5 acres and employed 550 workers. Many of them were from England, Scotland, Ireland, and Germany. Another view of the mill from a different direction, and you can see this is where the dam was. There was a bridge here, and the river continued down this way. These low-lying buildings here that had a sawtooth roof that had skylights in them to provide lighting, and an aerial view around the same time. There was a building boom in Bloomfield in the 1920s. There was a lot of additional industry coming into Bloomfield, a lot of people moving in to work in this industry. And you can see in this photo that houses are starting to spread out all around in the suburban area around Bloomfield. This section was originally part of the pond, but now by this time, by 1928, it had been drained and turned into Foley Field. And then a section of pond remained down here, which has since been drained and filled to become Memorial Park. Throughout most of the history of the mill, they were very innovative and they were always trying to keep up with the latest technology. In 1859, they were the first site in Bloomfield to install gas lighting. They had to build their own gas works to do that. This was a few years before gas was available for street lighting in Bloomfield when they built a gas works. Bloomfield built a gas works to create gas for street lighting. In the 1860s, they started to convert a lot of their hydro-powered machinery to coal-fired steam. Coal was conveniently available from the Morris Canal, which was right next to the pond. And this allowed them to expand and increase the capacity of their equipment and just run the operation a little more efficiently. In 1889, they installed electric lights. They were one of the first sites in the area to install electric lights. In the 1890s, they continued to expand, getting new equipment, keeping up with the latest technology, and they continued to do that for a while. I'll tell you a little more about the period in the early 1900s when they weren't so interested in keeping up with the latest technology. I'll talk more about that later. This photograph is in one of the Bloomfield Arcadia books. So the men who are noted in the red boxes are George and Benjamin Mortimer. Benjamin, on the right, kept a diary while he was working in the mill. So we talk about events that happened in the mill, things that were going on. He made an entry on May 1st in 1895. Myself and George had our pictures taken with the mill hands at noon today. The weather is fine, but cool. So he actually made the entry of this picture being taken in his diary. His diary included other interesting facts. He talked about some accidents that happened at the mill. If the mill didn't have any work on one day in the winter and the pond was frozen over, he would go ice skating. If the Morris Canal was frozen over, you could ice skate from Bloomfield, from Hoover Avenue all the way up to, well, he used to go to Patterson to visit his cousin. He would ice skate on the Morris Canal from Bloomfield to Patterson to visit his cousin in Patterson. So his full name was Thomas Benjamin Mortimer. His great-great-grandson found this diary and wanted to publish it, so he added a number of photographs about the mill and the houses that Thomas had built and lived in, and he published it, and we have a few copies in the museum. James Narr was his great-great-grandson, and he published this book called The Diary of Thomas Benjamin Mortimer, and he came to Bloomfield a few years ago and did a presentation for us about creating the diary. The mill was a popular subject for postcard photographs, and this is one of the common postcard photographs you'll see of a mill. Another postcard view where there are a couple boys over here fishing on the pond. Over on the left here, you can see the original mill building is still standing, the one that was built in 1830. This is the bridge right here, the bridge I pointed out earlier. In 1940, the town had an industrial exhibition called Know Your Town, and they invited all the industry in Bloomfield to have booths at this exhibition. And this is the one that Thomas Oakes had. And I mentioned before there was a building boom that started in the 20s and a lot of industry moving into Bloomfield. So by the 1940s, there was a lot of industry in Bloomfield. This exhibition that they had included about 40 industries. We have photographs of a lot of them on our website. So they did a lot of photography of the exhibit, and we have those photographs. So it included industries like Charms, Clark's Thread, Thomas Edison made batteries in Bloomfield. The Bakelite Corporation was here. This is the exhibit from Oakes Mill, and they were showing some of the uniforms, the types of uniforms that were made from their wool. And they also had samples of other fabrics and blankets that they made. Here's a close-up of a couple of uniforms and blankets. Now we're going to take a look at where the Oakes family lived. This is the first home that the Oakes family built. David built this house. It was at 249 Belleville Avenue. This is on the north side of Belleville Avenue, across the street from where what we know as Oakside is today. This is on the same property as the mill, so the mill was basically in their backyard. This house doesn't exist any longer. There's an apartment complex in this location. This is a map from 1906 that shows the layout of the buildings in the house we're talking about. So the pond here, this is the Morris Canal running down here. This is the house we were just looking at. And these are the mill buildings that we were looking at earlier. This is Belleville Avenue here. Looking at a close-up of the house, you can see they called it a homestead. It had a circular drive coming in. They had a greenhouse. They had an auto house. And there was an outbuilding here, like a barn or a carriage house building. And then the mill buildings were right back here. Now, in 1878, Thomas, David's son Thomas, was living in this house, and he remodeled it extensively. So they added a floor and made the house much fancier and larger. This is the house that was demolished in 1943 for an apartment complex. Now, it gets a little bit confusing about David and Thomas, the names David and Thomas. So David's father was Thomas. David named his son Thomas. Thomas named his son David. So the David of contemporary times, in 1900s, 1930, was the grandson David of David who started the mill. And there was a Thomas in between. So this is the Thomas period, David's father, or David, the grandfather's son, Thomas, who was the father of David. Now, at the time, there was a house where Oakside is today, and it was called the Flannery House. It was built around 1840, and when they built Oakside, they moved this house around the corner on Walnut Street. And it stood there for many years, but in 1949, they started to build the parkway, and the house was demolished for the parkway. So here's a summary of the two significant houses that the Oakses had. 1853, David built the original Oakside at 249 Belleville Avenue. 1878, his son Thomas gave the house a major makeover. Thomas built Oakside, the Oakside that we know, in 1895 at 240 Belleville Avenue across the street for his son David as a wedding gift. David married Jean Doswell in 1910, and they moved into the house. This is Oakside, the house that we know. This is a contemporary photograph. It was built in 1895. The architect was Charles Granville Jones. He was a prominent local architect. I think he lived in Belleville. He designed several buildings in Bloomfield, a number of schools, the high school, the original high school on the corner of Broad and Belleville Avenue, and several of the elementary schools. So Gene Oakes, the last surviving member of the family who was living in the house, decided to donate the house to the town in 1979. And it's been on the State National Register of Historic Places since 1981. Now, Oakes has built another house down Belleville Avenue. So if you're going east on Belleville Avenue, this would be the next house. And it was also designed by Charles Granville Jones. Thomas built it for his son, George. That's David's brother, who was also helping to run the mill at the time. And it looked very much like Oakside. It has the same footprint, but they used wood instead of stone for the first floor. This shows that house and the next house on Belleville Avenue, 214, going east on Belleville Avenue. That was also designed by Charles Granville Jones and also built by the Oakes family. The next house you see to the left, the leftmost house, was not one of the Oakes' houses, but later became a funeral home called Murray Funeral Home or Murray Quinn Funeral Home. So these two houses, 214 and 226, were demolished when the parkway was built. The leftmost house was still standing at the time. It became a funeral home, and then it was demolished 20 or 30 years ago to build a professional office building. Now, this aerial photograph is from 1935. The blue highlighted section over here is the Morris Canal. At the time, it was abandoned and eventually became John F. Kennedy Drive. Here's the original Oakes house that we were looking at, the outbuildings in the back on the pond. And this is Oakside that we were just looking at. There was a large garden over here that's still a garden today that's used as a community garden. People can rent plots in it. And then Mrs. Oakes had formal gardens over here behind the house. In 1928, McCall's magazine did a photo shoot of the interior of the Oakes' house. And we have those, we borrowed those, they have the photographs in Oakside. We digitized them, and we have this collection of photographs of the house on our website, hsob.org. That's for Historical Society of Bloomfield.org. We have a photo gallery that includes all of these photos. Now, Mrs. Oakes actually took all these photographs of the interior of the house, and along with some other family photographs and photographs of the house and the property, Mrs. Oakes gave that to her daughter Juliet in 1948. So these photographs were from the photo album that Mrs. Oakes created for her daughter. So I'm going to show you a few of these photographs. You can look at all of them, the whole set of them, including the basement, the laundry room, the kitchen, bedrooms upstairs, the playroom in the attic. We've got all those photographs. So this is the main stairway from the main entrance when you enter the house. This is the living room. This is on the right side as you come in. So if you were looking out the windows, you would be looking at Belleville Avenue. This was originally two separate rooms with corner fireplaces. And when David and Jean moved into the house, when they got married and moved into the house, they wanted to they turned it into one single room. They did a very thorough job rebuilding the fireplace and everything, so you would never know it was two different rooms. On the other side of the entrance is the music room. The type of corner fireplace that was in this room is similar to the two rooms that were converted into a living room on the other side of the house. Looking out this window would be Belleville Avenue. And then looking through the door, you're seeing Mrs. Oakes's garden room. It's also called the solarium. So this is a photograph of that room. So this was an addition that was built on the house later. It's got skylights and big windows. So this was Mrs. Oakes' light gardening, and this was where she kept all of her plants in the house. And it was a popular room to be used for functions. It's still used today. There's still events that happen there today. So this is the family in the garden room showing their children. So they had three daughters and one son. So this David, who's on right here, that's David, and this is his wife Jean. David named his son Thomas. He was called Tom. Now they also, in 1935, Mr. and Mrs. Oakes celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in the garden room. And here they are sitting in the middle of the room. They wore their wedding clothes from their wedding, and they encouraged their guests to do that too. We're talking to one of our members recently who's a descendant of the Dodds, another prominent family in Bloomfield, and pointed out a couple of his family members who were in this photograph, Allison Dodd and one of the other family members. So those were some of the people who were in attendance at the wedding. This is a view of the porch. The structure to the right is a porte cochere. So you could carriage could stop here and let you off, and you could walk into the house without having to walk through inclement weather. And this is a pond back here. There was this garden with a series of ponds and near the entrance to the house. This is what you'd see if you were looking out one of the upper floors of the house in the backyard. So this is the carriage house back here. This was a formal rose garden, and this area over here was for hanging clothes to dry. This house here was on Walnut Street. I mentioned the house that had been where Oakside was moved onto Walnut Street. This is not the house, but it was on this street. So the parking lot where Oakside is today, the parking lot used to be Walnut Street, but it continued beyond where it goes today, just the parking lot. So this house and most of Walnut, that section of Walnut Street, were demolished for the parkway. This is a view looking in the other direction. So if you were in the carriage house looking back at the house, this is the view. So you've got Mrs. Oakes's formal garden here with the rose garden, the laundry drying area. You can see Walnut Street over here. And this is the porte cochere I was referring to before. So the photograph we were looking at was this area of the porch right here. So this is the Oakes family in 1936. So Thomas is on the left, and the daughters are Juliet, Jean Jr., Eleanor, and then Mr. and Mrs. Oakes on the right side over here. And this is their dog, Sandy. This is a photograph of the family at the dinner table. And this is Mrs. Oakes in the azalea garden outside the house in 1964. Her signature hairstyle was braided, wrapped around in the back. So in 1976, when we were celebrating the National Bicentennial, Mrs. Oakes invited the town to a garden party at her house. And this was a photograph from that celebration. This is Mrs. Oakes sitting here. And this is when they started thinking about the idea of what are they going to do with this house when Mrs. Oakes leaves? So they started thinking about this idea of, wanting to preserve it and the possibility of donating it to the town. So by 1977, they had decided to give it to the town. This is a meeting with Mrs. Oakes on the left, her son Thomas, and the gentleman here is Russell Romilly. He was a newspaper editor, and the gentleman on the far right is Mayor Kinder. So they were planning out the process for handing over the house to the town. So when they gave over the house to the town, they also formed a set of trustees to take care of the house. And their original pledge was to preserve the buildings and grounds for posterity as both a National Historic Site and an important symbol of our community's heritage. and to promote creative expression in and to broaden appreciation of the arts. Now, one of the other features at the house was the children's house. So around 1928, the Oaks children, with the assistance of the master carpenter from the mill, built this house. We also have photographs of the children's house, detailed photographs of its history and how it was managed over the years on our website, including drawings that were made by the architect who was doing preservation work. So when the house was turned over to the town, it needed a lot of work. A lot of it had to be done because it was a historic site, had to be done as historic preservation work. And when they did the planning for the work they were doing in the 80s and 90s, the architect drew up plans for the house based on the way it was built so that it could be, to document it. And also because the house was in really bad shape at the time. So the roof had collapsed, and a Boy Scout troop took it on as a project. They dismantled the house, stored it in the carriage house, and built a concrete slab for the house, and then rebuilt the house on the concrete slab and fixed the roof and fixed the various things that were problems and put it back into pretty good shape. So we also have in the collection of photographs with website, Gene Oakes's description of the furniture that was in the house. They had electricity, a working doorbell, a sink in the kitchen with running water. They had these flower boxes under the windows, a doorbell here that actually worked. So the house is still there today. We did some restoration work on it a couple of years ago, but it always needs restoration. I'd love to see it restored the way it was when they had furniture and when it was furnished inside. Now, it's part of their mission to be involved in arts and culture. They had a lot of art exhibits and programs at Oakside in the 1980s after the town took over the house. And this is one of those exhibits. We have a Facebook page, and somebody posted on our Facebook page, does anybody have photographs of the giant popsicle that was in the yard at Oakside? And I didn't know what it was. I didn't live in Bloomfield at the time. So this is actually a creamsicle, and it was part of a pop art exhibit at Oakside in 1982 and 1983. And luckily, someone did have a photograph of it. Kathy Caruso Barbosa uploaded a photograph on Facebook, and this is the creamsicle at Oakside in 1982. Now, another claim to fame for Oakside was in October of 2021. There was an Amazon Prime program that was filmed in the house called Shelter. And it was a horror movie. There was a woman who lived in the house called the Bat Lady. So there were a lot of interesting scenes of the house, the inside of the house. There were not actual scenes of the surroundings of the house, but just the house. And this is the photograph is showing the house when it was decorated, so to speak, for the program. It was supposed to look like a haunted house. The windows on the first floor boarded up, and they have these fake vines hanging from the porch here. So some people were commenting on Facebook that it looked like the town was letting the house go to ruin, and they were probably going to tear it down and build apartments. So this program is still available. You can watch it on Amazon.com. I think it's about 6-part series, sort of horror story, murder mystery. So that's an interesting factoid about Oakside. So now I'm going to talk more about the pond in Morris Canal. So we looked at this map before from 1906. You can see where the pond was. And this is the Morris Canal running along here, which was abandoned and is now JFK Drive. So this part of the pond, that was swampy up in the northern part, but this is the part that was drained and filled to become fully filled. And then the part down here was filled and became Memorial Park. Now, the pond and mill were, again, popular targets of postcard photographs. And you can see the old original mill building here on the left, the dam here. This is the bridge. And this is looking across the pond from the other direction, looking at Foley Field. So the bleachers had been built by this time, and you could see this is from somewhere around the mill side of the pond, looking across the pond at Foley Field. And another photo, postcard photograph of the pond with a sailboat. Now, some of the houses, these are probably houses on Spring Street. James Street would be up here, and Spring Street's over this way. So again, the map from 1906, I want to point out a couple features here. Up here, there was, on the canal, was a footbridge. The street here used to be called Canal Street, but it's now called Maple Street, and this is Spruce Street. And then there was a coal yard noted here. This is what the footbridge looked like over the canal. The photo on the left, a postcard photo when the canal was in operation. This bridge was built by subscription for people who lived in the Bloomfield Center area of town so they could cross the canal to get to the mill. And then it was replaced by a modern bridge, and that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. So when JFK Drive was built, they continued to have a footbridge there, and the house that you see in the postcard photo is still there also. This is a photograph of the coal yard. So this is the pond over here. This is the towpath of the Morris Canal right here. And this is the Morris Canal, the water here. And this is a device for unloading the coal from the boats. And this is a pile of coal right here. This is the outbuilding that's in the back of the Oaks house. And this is the Oaks house that was on the north side of Belleville Avenue. Now, this is a postcard photo of the Morris Canal. We had this in our collection for many years and nobody knew where it was. But comparing it to the previous photograph, it looks like this is the coal yard at Oaks Mill. So this is the pond over here, the canal, the towpath right here. And this is the equipment that was used to unload the boat, the outbuilding in back of the house. And then in the distance, you can see the roof of the Oaks house. This photograph was taken by Charles Warren Eaton. Eaton was an artist and a photographer who lived in Bloomfield, and we have a large collection of his negatives were donated to us from his estate. So we've got a lot of photographs of the Morris Canal, Oaks Mill, other mills in Bloomfield, and these are on our website too. And Eaton was quite a talented photographer and used to travel to Europe every year, and he would take photographs of the places he was visiting in Europe. We have his collection of those photographs also. So we have about 1,000 photographs that Eaton took of places in Europe. Those are all on our website. So this was the towpath is here, the towpath of the canal. This is looking across the pond at the mill. Another Eaton photograph looking across the pond. So Eaton wasn't so interested in documenting the buildings or industry or people. He was looking for a sort of composing a scene, sort of combination of landscaping and sometimes also buildings. So here's another photograph of the pond. This is the towpath on the Morris Canal here. So we're looking across the pond, looking sort of to the north, about where Foley Field is today. And then another photograph a little further north. But I want to point out that you can see in the distance 3 little turrets, and I saw those there and wondered I wonder what that is. It looks like there were some little castles or something built back there. I didn't really know what they were or where they were, wondered if they were still there. So it turns out those are buildings on James Street, and they're still there, and still sitting. They're just it looked like they were probably built as multifamily houses, and the turrets were just part of the design of the houses. There are too many trees in the way for you to see these today from Foley Field, but you can see them from James Street. So then the mill started to decline, and then it was used as an industrial village. So late 1930s into 1941 was the Great Depression. This had a very bad impact on the mill. They had to cut to half capacity. 1939, World War II, they had complications in the manufacturing process. They were competing with synthetic fabrics. And in 1943, the mill closed. So I mentioned before that they were innovative with the equipment and trying to keep up with the latest technology for most of the history of the mill. But around the 1930s, when synthetic fabrics were coming into prominence, they had an opportunity to form a collaboration with DuPont to manufacture synthetic fabrics. But they thought nobody was ever going to wear these synthetic fabrics, and they decided to stick with wool. And they ended up closing a few years later. So in 43, when they closed, they were hoping that it could be maintained as a mill. And the first person who bought it was an industrial liquidator, and they did use it operate it as a mill for a few years, but it was never successful. So by 1947, they decided the mill plan wasn't going to work, and they decided to sell the machinery at auction. And then in 1951, a man named Sigmund Werner moved in and started manufacturing some things there that I'll tell you about in a minute. And then in 1955, it became an industrial village, and they rented spaces to 10 or 12 small businesses. So they called it an industrial village. I think it's what we'd call a industrial park now. And it was used that way for several years. Now, in 1949, they knew the mill wasn't going to be used anymore, so the town's master plan was proposing that they build a new high school in that area. They'd have park area, they'd have sports fields that were already near Foley Field. One of the advantages of this, you can see that Third River, this is Third River running down here. Third River floods occasionally, and if it did flood, most of the flood water would be accommodated by the lower lying lands around here, which would be park and sports fields. This straight line through here, which is labeled the proposed Route 4, that was actually what became the Parkway. When they were first planning the Parkway, they were calling it Route 4. And they knew that was where they were proposing putting it, and that was incorporated into the master plan. And that, in fact, is where they built the Parkway, although the Parkway ended up being wider than they expected it to be initially, and they ended up taking more property than they thought they would need. So this is comparing what was proposed in 1949 with what's actually there today. So today there are 3 large apartment buildings. Foley Field is up here and Memorial Park here. This is East Elmira Street, and this is Division Street up here. And the Parkway right along here. So by 1955, this article from 55 says they were thriving as an industrial village. They were making everything from golf equipment, bowling balls, aluminum furniture, and they manufactured sleeping bags, which were called slumberjack. And we mentioned Sigmund Werner before. He fled Austria in 1938 and started manufacturing metal things for aircraft and exhaust pipes, first aid kits. And in 1951, he moved into part of Oaks Mill and started manufacturing aluminum furniture and ski equipment. He, at his peak, they employed 300 workers. And we've got an example of the kind of chair they would have made. They used the name Chaircraft, and they manufactured this aluminum furniture. They also manufactured ski equipment. So this is the kind of thing, I found this on eBay. This was an advertisement or a page from a catalog showing the equipment that they manufactured. These are their bowling ball bags. And there was a business, an example of one of the other businesses that was in there was a place called Foley Mills. They made furniture and they also made sets for theater productions. And this was photographed on Facebook when people were having a discussion about this by Kit Shatner. So we're looking at that aerial photograph again. So here's Belleville Avenue. This is where the Morris Canal was. It's now JFK Drive. Oakside here. This was Walnut Street. And this shaded section here is where the Garden State Parkway came through. So these were the houses that the Oaks family built that we were looking at before. These houses were demolished. Houses on the other side of Belleville Avenue were demolished. This house has an interesting history. This house wasn't demolished, it was moved. So this is Walnut Street here. This house was on Walnut Street and it was moved to the corner of Beach and Spruce. And it has this distinctive gambreled roof, which, if you look at it today, you'll see the similarity between the house that's there and the photograph. They actually had to cut off. So where this was the mill building, and when they built the parkway here, they had to cut a section of, they had to cut the corner off of that building. So this building used to extend out to here, and they changed the angle of the wall and built a new wall to accommodate the parkway. And this, you don't even notice this when you're driving over it, but you're actually driving over Third River here. And this is a photograph from the early days of the parkway, probably in the 60s. The mill buildings over here were a prominent feature of Bloomfield that were something that you'd see regularly on the parkway. So around 2014, well, a little before that, they started planning to build an apartment complex on the property. They planned to demolish all the old buildings and build new buildings. So around 2014, this is Memorial Parkway, which is the access road to the mill from Belleville Avenue. So there used to be a sign there that listed all the industries that were renting space in the industrial village. And this is an example of some of the businesses that were there around 2014. Many of them had to, well, they all had to move out, but some of them were still there and wanted to continue to be there, but had to move out. These photographs are from June in 2014 of the demolition. So approaching the mill, this is the bridge over the dam that I was pointing out earlier. Another view of the dam. So this used to be closed and water level was up to closer to the bottom of the bridge. There's still a bridge there today, a newer bridge, and you can look under it and you'll see some remnants of the old dam. Then approaching the mill, here's one of the buildings partially demolished. Buildings between where we are and the building that's standing have already been demolished. So where we saw those low-lying buildings that had the sawtooth roof, this is where the roof line was that met up with this wall on this building. So they had the sawtooth roof, so they would have skylights on part of the roof, which would provide additional light in factories. I think these would have made nice lofts, but they chose to build new buildings instead. So I want to call your attention to these stars and some of the features of this building. When we were looking at the photograph from 1895, you can see the windows, the stars, and the shutter hinges from the old building that are part of this building that you see on the right. So these stars are Anchor plates, they're called star anchor plates. They were used to increase the structural integrity of the building. You could see little hinges where the shutters used to be attached, and the arched brick arches above all the windows. There's a skylight in one of the factory buildings. If you look at the old photographs, you'll see the building that has the skylight on the top. And then just some photographs of interior of existing buildings as the buildings are being demolished and cleaned out. So I like to, I guess I'm an urban explorer. I like to explore urban sites like this that are in transition. I happened to stop in here on a Sunday morning. Nobody else was around. This is the part of the building where they changed this wall. This is the wall that was cut off and rebuilt. So looking out these windows, that's the parkway right out there. This is that wall again. You can see there was a window that was cut off and bricked up here, and it's not at a straight angle here. It's got a not the same angle as the original wall. One of the interesting features you can see on the ceiling is this knob and tube wiring. Again, this is the parkway out here. This is a scene that I just happened upon in the building. I did not stage this. There just happened to be an ice cream machine and a television. There's the hardwood floors were still in place. A couple of the elevators that were added later on. Now, when I was there taking photographs, I noticed what looked like a tunnel made out of brick that had water running through it. So there's an opening here, and you see a little more of it down here, the water in it. And this is part of it had been opened already from the demolition work. And I wondered what that was. I mean, I didn't think they would put a stream under the mill. So in looking at maps and where this was located on the property, I think this was the tail race. The way this hydropower worked, the pond was up here. So the water would come into the mill where they had this machinery that was turning the hydropower into power. It would either be some kind of water mill or turbine. I've never seen any diagrams or photographs of the equipment, but after they used the water for the hydropower, it was sent out in a tail race that would go back into the river. And I think that's what this was. And the fact that they didn't need to build a conduit for this, um, for what might have been a stream, it wasn't really a stream. It was just a puddle of water that had remained there because it was used as the tail race. So the new construction also started in 2014. While the buildings were still being demolished, they were starting to build the new buildings. And as you can see in this photograph and all the subsequent photographs, there was a smokestack that remained on the property. That was one of the last things that was torn down because it had cell antennas on it and they had to build a new tower for the cell antennas. This is the building where we saw the skylight earlier. The smokestacks is standing almost alone. They've removed more of the buildings around it, and it's the only thing standing in that area. And this is what the apartments look like that are there today. This is from their website called Oaks Pond at Bloomfield. I think it's interesting that some of the developers of some of these new properties are acknowledging the importance of the history of some of these locations using the name Oaks Pond. They decided to use the name Oaks Pond for the place. Another one of the new Another one of the new developments in Bloomfield is called the Green, which was named after the park in Bloomfield, the Green. And that concludes the program. If you'd like to look at more of the photographs, our website is hsob.org. We've got a photo gallery that's got the inside oak side, the photos of the children's house. We've got the Eaton's photos of the Morris Canal, Davies Mill, Third River. And we've also got on the website a resources page, which has a number of historical digitized books, including the one about Oaks Mill. If you'd like to reach the Historical Society, our email is info@hsob.org. And the Charles Warren Eaton photographs of Europe are on a separate website, charleswarreneaton.org. We've got a collection, almost 1,000 photographs of his photos of Italy, Belgium, Germany, Netherlands. And we've also got photographs of Bloomfield, of Mills and Third River and the Morris Canal. And if you'd like to reach me, if you have any questions or follow-up, my email is rich@richrockwell.com. And thank you for watching our program.